Long before the name Timbuktu echoed through the courts of Europe, it was simply a nomadic settlement at the edge of the desert, a meeting point, a rest stop, a place where water met sand and camel met cargo. Its name, Timbuktu, is believed to come from a woman named Buktu, who guarded a well. Tim means place. Buktu, the place of Buktu's well. A humble beginning for a place that would rise like gold dust from the wind. By the 12th century, West Africa was booming. The Ghana Empire had already traded salt for gold. The Mali Empire was rising fast, and in the fertile plains between the Niger River and the encroaching desert, small trading outposts began to thrive. Timbuktu became a magnet for traders. They came with salt slabs on camelback from Togoza, gold nuggets from Bambouk, cloth and weapons from Morocco, and books, always books, from Cairo, Fez and Al-Andalus. But it wasn't just goods that passed through Timbuktu. It was ideas. The city began to attract scholars, seekers of knowledge. Poets, jurists, astronomers, herbalists, and architects. As word spread across the Sahel and beyond, Timbuktu began to change. From trade hub to a university town, from a desert outpost to a spiritual and intellectual beacon. The Niger River fed the people. The sand guarded their secrets, and the minds of Timbuktu began to dream beyond the dunes. But how did this trading town become the center of African scholarship? What drew minds and merchants alike? The answer lies in power, gold, and a ruler whose name still bends the arc of history. To understand how Timbuktu became a jewel of the world, we must trace the gold. Because in ancient West Africa, gold wasn't just a currency. It was a weapon, a message, a source of divine power. By the 13th century, the Mali Empire had absorbed much of Ghana's former glory, and at its heart ruled a dynasty of kings who understood something Europe hadn't yet fully grasped. That trade and tolerance could build empires. Gold flowed from the south, traded for Saharan salt, Berber horses, North African weapons, and most of all, knowledge. It was during this golden age that Timbuktu was formally absorbed into the Mali Empire, under the reign of Mansa Musa's predecessor, Abu Bakr II, and then, more famously, Mansa Musa himself. The city's location was unmatched, sitting between the Saharan trade routes and the rich inland kingdoms to the south. Caravans would carry goods over 1,000 miles, enduring brutal sandstorms and weeks of travel, just to reach Timbuktu. There, at the heart of this convergence, merchants traded not just gold for salt, but ideas for influence. And while Timbuktu gained wealth from taxes, trade, and market stalls, it also gained something far more powerful: global attention. Arab geographers and historians began to take notice. Timbuktu, once just a local name, began to appear in chronicles as a place of wisdom and wonder, a city rich not only in gold, but in intellect. Its fame spread from Fez to Cairo, from Mecca to Venice, and later, even to Lisbon and Seville. But while the world heard of its gold, it was about to witness something more precious rise from the sand, not in the form of a coin, but in the form of a classroom. While the gold made Timbuktu famous, the manuscripts made it eternal. By the 14th century, Timbuktu had become more than a marketplace. It was a university city, a place where students came not to trade, but to think. At its peak, Timbuktu housed three major centers of learning: Sankoré University, Jinaba, and Sidi Yahya. Together, they formed the backbone of what some scholars call the Oxford of Africa. But this wasn't European-style education. Students here studied the Quran, but also law, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics, all written in Arabic and Ajami scripts. It was said that a scholar in Timbuktu might debate theology in the morning, treat patients by noon, and recite poetry by evening. And these scholars weren't just religious clerics. They were intellectual elites, respected judges, doctors, scientists, and philosophers. Some owned libraries of over 10,000 manuscripts. The written word was power, and Timbuktu held millions of them. Some of these texts discussed advanced mathematics and astronomy, hundreds of years before the European Enlightenment. Others contained treatises on environmental science, political theory, and even women's rights in Islam. Knowledge in Timbuktu was not chained in the shadows. It was passed down, debated and respected. But even as Timbuktu rose, it was still a fragile jewel, exposed to the winds of empire and the ambitions of kings. One of those kings would change everything and make Timbuktu famous across the world, for better or for worse. If gold built Timbuktu, Mansa Musa made it legendary. Ruling from 1312 to 1337, Mansa Musa was the wealthiest man in recorded history, richer than Bezos, Musk, or Rockefeller, and much of that wealth flowed through Timbuktu. But it wasn't his gold that shook the world, it was his pilgrimage. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out for Mecca, across the Sahara, through Cairo, and beyond, with an entourage of 60,000 people, 80 camels, and literal tons of gold. He gave so much gold away in Cairo that he caused inflation for a decade. Egypt's dinar collapsed in value. That's how wealthy this one African king was. But Musa wasn't just showing off. He returned from Mecca with something more powerful than gold: architects, scholars, books, and blueprints. From Cairo and Al-Andalus, he brought back stonemasons like Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, who helped construct Jinaba Mosque, now a World Heritage Site and symbol of West African Islamic architecture. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu became not just rich, it became revered. The Arab world wrote about it in awe. European maps began placing Timbuktu as a golden city in the sands. Scholars traveled across continents to teach and learn there. And most importantly, the manuscript tradition expanded. Libraries grew. Timbuktu's intellectual identity was sealed in ink, parchment, and clay. But fame is a double-edged sword. The more the world heard of Timbuktu's wealth, the more it began to want it. And in time, legends would blow with lies. Gold would attract guns, and the myth would start to consume the truth. By the late 14th century, Timbuktu had become a name whispered across Europe, but not with accuracy. With imagination, medieval European maps showed Timbuktu as a city of solid gold, ruled by an African king who bathed in wealth and ruled over endless riches. European chroniclers, with little understanding of West Africa, built a fantasy of Timbuktu that blurred reality. In their minds, it was Africa's El Dorado, a black mecca of wealth and mystery. But the truth was richer than the myth, not in treasure, but in knowledge. As the age of exploration advanced, European empires were no longer content with stories. They wanted to own what they imagined. By the 17th century, maps showed Timbuktu as a prize, a target. The French, Portuguese, and British sent envoys and spies to locate it. But most failed. The Sahara was brutal, the routes deadly, and Timbuktu remained elusive. In 1828, a young French explorer named René Kelly finally reached the city disguised as a Muslim pilgrim. He had made it. He expected marble palaces, streets of gold. What he found was different. A proud but crumbling city, still rich in knowledge, but scarred by centuries of war and economic decline. To Kelly, Timbuktu was a mass of ill-looking houses, and his disappointment echoed through Europe. They wanted spectacle. Instead, they found dignity and books, and so the myth of Timbuktu collapsed under its own legend, but only in the eyes of those who came looking for gold, not wisdom. But Timbuktu was not done. It would rise again, through resistance, scholarship, and survival. Even when it fell into decline, its spirit endured. But like all ancient cities, it had to weather the storms. Even the greatest cities must bow to time, and by the 16th century, Timbuktu faced a storm it could not outthink. In 1591, soldiers of the Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansa marched into the city, not to learn, but to loot. The invading army had gunpowder, something the Mali and Songhai empires had never seen. Timbuktu, the city of scholars, had no defense against firearms. Its libraries were ransacked. Scholars fled. Some were executed. The golden city of learning fell into silence. For centuries after, Timbuktu drifted into obscurity, forgotten by global empires, starved of trade, and slowly buried in sand. But beneath that sand, the manuscripts remained. Hidden in homes, mosques, and underground vaults, hundreds of thousands of handwritten manuscripts survived wars, colonization, and time itself. In the 21st century, Malian historians and local families began to digitize these sacred documents, protecting African knowledge from fire, water, and war. Some of the manuscripts discuss vaccines, astronomy, law, gender rights, and ethics, hundreds of years ahead of their time. Timbuktu may no longer be a trade capital, but it is now a symbol, a reminder that Africa's legacy is not all alone. It is written, preserved, brilliant, and ancient. It is the proof that African minds carved their own place in the global story of knowledge. So, was Timbuktu ever paved in gold? Maybe not literally, but what it gave the world was more valuable. Wisdom, scholarship, peace through thought, and power through literacy. And that is more lasting than any gold coin. In the sand, we found scrolls. In the scrolls, we found truth. And in that truth, we remember who we really are. This is Ancestral Files, uncovering the hidden stories of Africa. Subscribe and be part of history.